excellent soldiers. Okay. On our way. And go. On our way. Мы под обстрелом. We can start. Come and get some. Есть, товарищ командир. Нормально.
Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to Sex and Design. Come for the promise of sex and stay for the design. I'm Dr. Sex. We are currently developing Believe in War, a TTRPG against war, and this is another of its devblogs. Let me take a seat. In today's devblog, or whatever the proper way of saying it is, I want to focus in the theoretical base that supports the project, as well as explaining some of the academic references of the project. As I elaborated in my previous log, the game is centered around a message, an anti-war message, that is built on the Ernest Becker theory of cultural hero systems, as well as other documentation as we are about to see. The first step in my research was to define what is war. And well, war is strangely a very abstract concept. I want to think that's mainly because this term has changed a lot during human history, and depending on social interest, what benefits us or what is taboo in the current period, etc. But this is not something that is going to distract us today. There are many academic works trying to exactly define what is or isn't war. Also, a brief disclaimer. I'm going to talk about various works, authors, and historic events. Please understand that, though I would love to, I can dig deeply in them. So if you want to know more, just refer to the works mentioned or check the full reference list in the description. Let's start. The definition I choose is rather simple, and possibly common one. War is an armed fight, and therefore violent, that occurs between two parties, understanding the parties involved as groups with an established political cause. Generally, these groups will be considered states. Population settled in a territory with a legitimate government. As I say, a quite simple and direct definition. However, it's more interesting for the project not how to theoretically define what war is, but to know how people and societies conceptualize it. That is, how people see war. So, as a designer, I can have it in mind when trying to express the message in the game, because, as I see it, it all comes down to this fact: how an individual understands war will encourage or discourage their taste for it. I centered in three conceptualizations of war: creative war, absolute war, and just war. Each one has its own definition of war and its place in history. Let's start with creative war. Putting it simple, is waging war for the simple act of doing it. Is the most emotional and artistic way of seeing the act of war, where the singular combatants shine, showcasing their martial art, dominated by brief ideas and emotions. We find this kind of conceptualization in numerous ancient traditions, like the medieval exhibition festivals, that originated to showcase the skills expected of a knight as an alternative to war in peacetimes. These festivals summarize a casual relation with combat, the shouts and amusement of the crowds, the vision of the participants as heroes and villains, their copulation in chivalric literature. There was even a lot of competitiveness, dirty play, revenge, and quarrels. This is one of the reasons these festivals were later forbidden by the church, who had a very important role in defining the concept of just war, as we will see. This more ancient way of seeing war ended up evolving in new conceptions as human society also progressed. Just war was also a known way of seeing war, initially carved by the church and other religious morals. However, it acquired a quite different modern vision, and I view it as a mixture between the other two concepts, so we will leave it for later. For now, I think the evolution of creative war to absolute war is more obvious. Let's focus on the example of the Moyoyama period, between the second half of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century in Japan. We all know what a samurai is, a powerful fighter. In their golden age, they were considered individual, proud, and discreet warriors. For them, Personal honor and value were the most important virtues, and they were not keen to let their achievements go unnoticed, even when coordinating with others. In the Moyoyama period, this idea was dying. The samurai were no longer viewed as such in the lens of military strategy. The way of doing war started to acquire a methodic manner. The great generals now planned in armies of samurais, and not individual samurai warriors. So the individual feats were now measured in relation with their contribution to a carefully planned strategy that contemplated a massive deployment of troops, the intelligent use of the terrain, concentrated firepower, the gathering of supplies and ammunition, in a scale not so different from the Europe of the time, and with even a greater skill doing so. This way of organizing combat was starting to look like absolute war. This is the maximum rationalization of combat, the search to establish an intelligent method of its causes and logic in its execution. Karl von Clausewitz, an experienced Prussian general, is the leading figure regarding this conceptualization and wrote his conclusions in Von Krieg, or On War, at the beginning of the 19th century. Well, it was published by his wife, actually, and he never finished them like he wanted. He was very perfectionist. Fortunately, his wife did a very good job putting them together. So, absolute war is waging war with a political end, a war that originates from politics. The political ambition establishes what the war is supposed to achieve and the magnitude of the necessary efforts to achieve it. It's a logical and scientific way of affronting and waging war. This concept is so logical and rational that Clausewitz warns about mixing war with emotion and sensations, that he associates with deep irrationality. He says that mixing emotions with the reasons for waging war distance it from intelligence. As a political tool, the emotional and sensitive individuals that form the state cause obstructions and distance war from its purpose, being tempted by the creative aspect of it, that we have seen before. Clausewitz is pessimistic regarding these aspects. He knows that despite the efforts of those in charge of waging wars, the emotions will always leak, waging war, in the end, for non-political causes, transforming politics into another of the weapons used in war. Finally, our last conceptualization, just war. It consists in war abided by a group of rules for combat, previously appointed between the participants and, importantly, usually from the same cultural background. As you may guess, this conceptualization is a way of applying morals to the act of war, in a strange way of justifying this act. Like saying, it's not so bad because we have some moral standards. Well, in reality, all of the exposed conceptualizations have their way of justifying war. But coming back, this just war is deeply related to religion. The book of St. Agustín, The City of God, or its complete name, On the City of God Against the Pagans, he established the basis of this kind of thought, that later were embraced by modern thinkers. This book is a response to the decline of Rome, after the Visigoths raided in 410, and arguments that Christianity is the true religion over other religions and philosophies. However, in this book, St. Augustine also talks about war rules concerning Christianity, how the bodies of the just should be properly buried, the conditions under which killing others can be done without incurring in the sin of murder, the moral consideration of committing suicide to avoid torture, the importance of following or not a certain kind of orders. Even the famous and mystic figure of Sun Tzu appeals in the act of war to the moral rules that surround a conflict. The moral law makes people be in complete agreement with their ruler, so that they will follow him with content for their lives, without fainting and in the face of any danger. I think understanding war within some moral rules that authorize the conflict and the participants are going to respect is a conceptualization that stays halfway between the two previous ones. In one hand, from creative war, it takes the feelings and the morals that are used to establish these rules, nearly treating the conflict as a game, with a manual that all the players must respect. In the other hand, the war still functions as a political tool, as the concept of absolute war established. But I think these two halves are not so compatible, and the concept of just wars can be easily inclined by one or the other, especially by the absolute war half, using the concept of just war for justifying the causes but then not following the moral rules. This generally happens when the participants stop seeing each other as equals. Their cultural difference can make their feelings, prejudice, or just pure ignorance get in the way of the moral code. Or also just lying and waging war under moral pretenses to justify it, and later not applying any moral rule to the enemy. Just war becomes very distorted when the politics get involved too much. In this case, the moral rules don't get corrupted by cultural misunderstanding or ideology, but because political importance is so great that morals need to get out of the picture. War is viewed with a logical and efficient functionality, and everything is valid to obtain the desired political objective. Clausewitz put it very clearly with this statement, because in matters as dangerous as war, the errors that are allowed to persist out of benignity are precisely the most harmful. Okay, so now we have reviewed these three ways of viewing, understanding, and justifying war. It's important to note that they don't exist separately. As we have seen, they mix and gain or lose importance depending on the historical period and cultural relevance. War can be even justified using all these three conceptions, just aiming at different levels of the society. The best part is, despite all these ways of understanding war, people were very conscious of the crudeness and brutality of these conflicts. In the end, all of this makes for a deep act of hypocrisy. The conceptions justify war, yes, thus justifying the evilness and destruction it brings while trying to avoid all regrets. For the good of the country, in the name of God, it's okay because we don't bomb hospitals. We have to showcase our power to defend ourselves. War is something much darker than politics and justifies violence. War is all these conceptions, a way to systematize hate against our fellow men and to perfect the ways of murder. It brings hate, it generates hate, and feeds hate. It only causes destruction of economies, of countries, of lives, of morals, of societies, and of ourselves. This will all come back in the next Devblog, where yes, I will finally talk about the cultural hero systems. You may be asking, why all this yapping? What does all this have to do with the game? The research process is very important in all levels, I answer, especially when working in a creative process. The more reference you have, the better, especially if they don't come from games. In this case, I believe it's important for me to investigate and observe how these conceptions appear in history and our society, so that later I have the necessary knowledge to discredit them when developing the game. Well, I think this will be all for today. Thank you all for watching. I will gladly read your feedback if you want to give some. Just please be constructive. I also apologize for my English, as I said, not my first language. Farewell.